In this video, I'm going to go over the basics of plugins for processing audio and MIDI inside of Ableton. So if you're not familiar with plugins and what they are, I'll open up the browser window and you can go into Audio Effects. And if you look at all of these right here in the browser, then you'll see that these are all the plugins that Ableton offers. Depending on if you have Live Light, Standard, or Suite, you might not see all of these plugins in your browser window. Basically what a plugin does is you add it to a track and it processes the sounds that are coming out in some sort of way. Now there's a difference between audio plugins and MIDI plugins. Ableton also offers some MIDI effect plugins that you can see here in your MIDI effects. And I'll dive into each one of those and how they're different and exactly what they're doing. If you'd like to follow along with this, then make sure that you download the Ableton Basics follow along session and open that up, and you'll have these audio files in that session. So we'll start with the audio effects plugins. And if I click on this house loop, you'll see that we have audio inside of this session. And if I jump back over to the device view, I can hit Shift Tab or just click on this tab down in the lower right hand corner. So you can jump it back and forth between both sections. Now right here where it says drop audio effects here, then all I would have to do is go in and grab one of these effects and drag and drop it onto the track. So if I put in a compressor, it shows up right here. So the way this works is that the audio will play and then it will pass through whatever effects you drop onto this section. And it'll process them from left to right. So if I drop a compressor and then I drop an EQ after that, and then maybe if I drop in some filter delay or something, so it'll process this through the compressor first, then through the EQ, and then through the filter delay. Now I'm not going to get too deep into what all of these plugins are and exactly what the plugins do. I'll do that in later videos. Now a really great thing to make use of if you're not really sure on how to use these just yet are the presets. And a preset is just when you go into a plugin, adjust some of the settings, and then save it so that you can come back to it and use it again later. The presets that you'll see in these plugins and in virtual instruments and things like that are just things that people have already done and saved for you. So if I hit this little recycling looking button, it'll jump into hot swap mode and I can go through any one of these. So you see that because I pressed the hot swap on the compressor, it opens up the folder for the compressor, and all of these names underneath of it are all of the presets that are available to me. And so I can go in and I can double click on this and it'll give me a preset for the acoustic. And so you see how the settings change inside of the compressor. So I can change all of these and just mess around with it until I find something that works for that audio that I'm working on. So maybe we'll use this drum kick compressor, and then I can also do the same for the EQ8. If I hit the hot swap on the EQ, then you'll see that it opens up for, I can have presets for specifically for drums, I can filter, form it, and then instruments. If I have like a specific instrument like an EQ, a bass, something like that, then I can go in and make use of some of those. Now you might not have access to the EQ8. You can always put in the EQ3 and do the same thing with this and go through these different settings. So you have edges, high, infrasonic. So you can just double click and test out some of the different presets. So I'll just exit out of hot swap mode, and all of these plugins right now are on this house loop plugin. So if I go back and I turn all of these off, you'll hear what the house loop sounds like by itself. Or if you remember from the other video, this is what it sounds like. And then if I turn all of this processing back on, it sounds like this now. So essentially we've created an effects chain on the house loop that we have going on right now. And like I said, the audio processes from left to right. So as the audio plays, it passes through this compressor, then it's going through this midnight preset on the EQ3, then it passes through the EQ8, which essentially is doing nothing. And then it passes through the filter delay. But the cool thing is, if you look at the EQ8 as this is playing, so the midnight EQ, the gain is turned all the way down on the low, the gain on the high is turned all the way down, and the mid is plus 6 dB. So essentially this is creating what's called a bandpass EQ, and I'll get more into that stuff later, but you can see how it's working on the EQ8 spectrum. So if I play this, you'll look and you'll only see gray kind of lines jumping up in the middle, and that the spectrum is just showing you what frequencies are passing through this EQ plugin. So you can see that there's only stuff passing through there. If I turn this off, you'll see a lot more frequencies going through the EQ8, so there's a lot more gray in this area. And just to show the order of processing too, I'll move this to after the EQ8, and so now you'll see all the gray in here, but you'll still hear the midnight processing on it. So all the frequencies are reaching this EQ8, but they're not, this EQ3 is not allowing all of them to pass through to get to the filter. So it looks like this. And the order in which you place these plugins does make a difference on the sound that you get out on the back end. The next thing I want to show you are the MIDI effect plugins. So we'll just really quickly create a MIDI track and definitely start making use of those shortcuts. They're going to make your workflow that much faster. That was just Command-Shift-T on Mac or Control-Shift-T on PC. And then if I go over to my instruments, I can just grab any kind of simpler instrument. We'll just grab that grand piano again, drag and drop that on there. And so now you'll see that when I loaded that up, it record armed the track, so now I can play that grand piano. And the next thing I'll do is I'll create a MIDI clip. So I'll double click on that, and we'll just draw in one note. Oh, not a bunch of notes. So let's change this grid to 1 bar, and I'll just draw in a C. And then we'll go back into the other window. And now what we'll do is we'll go over to our MIDI effects, and you can grab, let's say, a chord plugin. And you drag and drop that onto the track. And now what happens is the MIDI note that is in here, in this MIDI clip, will play, and when it plays, it passes through from left to right. So it'll pass through this chord plugin, and then this chord plugin is going to play this grand piano. So with the chord plugin not set to anything or turned off, it'll just play the one note. So let me stop this other clip and hit play on this. So all it's doing is playing that one note. Now if I turn this chord plugin on and I change the settings of this, you'll hear that it starts to play more than one note. So we'll add 7, we'll just add a bunch of these. Maybe an octave up, maybe an octave below. So now it'll sound like 5 notes because it's playing that one note and then it's playing 1, 2, 3, 4 other notes. So again, that one MIDI note is playing through this chord. It's splitting the MIDI notes into other MIDI notes, and then it's playing through the grand piano. And then I can add a scale effect. So I can go in, and this is where presets also come in handy. I can go grab a C major scale effect and place it on here. And then now I can play it in any one of these scales. So again, it starts with this chord, it plays through this scale plugin, and then it plays the grand piano. And it might sound a little bit different if I put this plugin before the chord. You're going to start to hear that the chords sound a little bit different. So you see that it doesn't change as much or as often because it's only playing the one note through here, so it's always going to play that same note as long as it shows up in that scale. And I'll get deeper into the scales and the MIDI effect plugins in other videos, but this is just to show you that you have these effects and this is how they operate basically. So you put this plugin on the track, the order in which you put these plugins makes a difference, and then it processes through this virtual instrument. And then you can go in and you can even drop in audio effects. Now, like I said, everything passes from left to right. So you have these MIDI effects and they play the virtual instrument. And then if I drag and drop, let's say a compressor onto this, you'll see that it drops it at the very end of this track. So you can see where it says drop audio effects here. You'll have the MIDI effects, you'll have your virtual instrument, and then you'll have your audio effects after it. So now this virtual instrument is being affected by whatever effects you place after it. So it has to create some kind of sound or some audio, and then it gets processed through the audio effects. The last thing I'll show you for the processing and plugins are the sends. So if we turn on the sends, you'll see that these little buttons pop up, and then also the returns, you'll see that we have a reverb and a simple delay. And if you remember from the very first video where I was showing you audio, I recorded my voice and then I turned up these sends on it so that I could get some reverb and delay effects on my voice. And basically what happened was, if I go back over to the arrangement view, you'll see that I have my vocals, and I can hold this and hit tab and bring it back over to the session view, and it's essentially doing the same thing. So it doesn't matter if I'm playing it over here or playing it over here, the sends are still sending the same way from this. So if I turn this one all the way down, you'll see that it turns it all the way down over here as well. So now if we're talking about processing and the order of processing, if I place plugins on top of this audio track, I'm inserting it directly onto the track. So that means it's affecting that sound directly. But then if I don't want it to affect the sound directly, but I want to have some kind of effect on it, then we have these sends. And what I can do is I have this audio and I want it to have something on it, but I don't want to place it directly on this track. You see we have no audio effects. So then what I do is I turn up these sends, and it sends some of this audio over to this instrument, and it'll pass through here, and then I can mix in however much or little that I want to hear. And what that sounds like is, what I'll do is I'll loop just this section. So I'll highlight it, Command L, and I'll hit play. Let me stop this other one. So I'll hit play, and this is my vocals with no effects on them. And then when I turn up the send, you'll start to hear that there's the very first one, this A is sending over to a reverb, so you'll hear that it starts to add a reverb. So the more I turn it up, the more I get my vocals sending over here, and the more I hear that effect on it. So I can do the same with the simple delay. So if I turn this up, without it, there's nothing going to the simple delay, but if I turn it up a little bit, you'll hear a little bit of the delay. And then if I add more, you'll hear more of the delay. Now I can turn both of those down, and what I can also do is I can go back over to the other window, and I can go into my audio effects, and I can grab that same reverb. I can even go in and grab a preset if I want. So I can do a hall. I can go in and grab, I don't know, cathedral. Let's try that. And then I can close that and go into my simple delay. And I can grab some preset out of there too if I want, but we'll just grab the basic simple delay. And so now I'm inserting these directly on this track. So instead of turning up these sends and getting and blending in some of that sound, I'm getting this directly on the track. So if I turn these all up to 100% dry wet, now I'm getting my vocals going through this, and all I'm going to hear is the effects. And if I show you the audio, you'll hear that there's actually a delay, because it'll start playing this, but you won't hear it for a second. And that's just because I have it going through 100%. So if I turn this all the way down to 0, this works just like the send knobs do. So the less of the dry wet, the more I hear the original sound. And then the more I turn these up, the more I hear my sound, my original sound, mixed with these. And this is putting these directly onto this audio track instead of putting them on returns and sending some of the signal over to it. So this is what it sounds like with about 50% dry wet on both. So you see you can get a similar effect by putting this directly onto the track. So if you don't have, maybe if you're in live light and you don't have access, I think you get a limit of like two return tracks, and you want to have, if you want to have more reverbs and more delays and more effects for various sounds, then you can apply them directly to the track like this, as opposed to if you've already used up your two return tracks. Let's say you have different effects on them. But then the other thing to that is I can delete both of these. And if I want to make it sound like all of these things are playing in the same space, then I turn up the reverb for all of these. And now these are all going to this one reverb. So now it makes them sound like they're all playing in the same place. So that's kind of the benefit of using these returns as opposed to putting the reverb or whatever directly on the track. So I can send multiple things to just one instead of having to take this reverb and put on every single one of these tracks. And so that's just kind of real quick down and dirty on how this stuff operates and how it works. And I'll get more into detail about these things, about how the reverb works and about how the delay works and about adding the processing and the order of processing and the best ways to use this processing to get different effects and different kinds of sounds depending on what you're going after in other videos. So if some of the things that I went over in here didn't make a whole lot of sense to you just yet, don't worry about it. I'll go further into detail on a lot of these things, so it should make a lot better sense in the upcoming videos.